Well, this album came out of nowhere for me, and I mean, I saw that it was getting a lot of critical acclaim, and I mean, when the Melon gives it a 10, you gotta check it out. So, yeah, let's dive in and unpack this one.
You want to set out for the seas, turning wheel, but I want to stay up on with you.
The Turning Wheel by Spelling. So, Spelling with 3 L's, which makes me happy as a dyslexic. I'm like, haha, vindicated. So this is being led by Cristia Ty Cabral. I hope I pronounced your name correctly. She is an American experimental pop musician. This is hakening back to like the 80s with such prominent experimental pop artists like Peter Gabriel and Kate Bush. So you got my heart right there. And I mean, the comparisons between Spelling and Kate Bush are, you can draw them. This is her third full-length album release, her first one being Pantheon of Me, released in 2017, and Maisie Fly, released in 2019. The overall flavor that I get from this is that very kind of accessible expressions in a experimental flavoring. I mean, it's just right there in the nomiker of experimental pop music. She's pushing the boundaries of what pop music can sound like, while A, still being very accessible, while B, pushing the limits of what that accessibility really means, all the while being extremely catchy, extremely memorable, and very tangible. Even some of the more ethereal tracks that feel like they're, things that are off of Radiohead's Moon-Shaped Pool are still extremely accessible and tangible. Like I can reach out and grab whatever it is that Spelling is putting down. I mean, the album opens up with a brilliant catchy tune of Little Deer that reminds me of some of the more subtle moments from The Hazards of Love from The Decemberist. It feels like that chugging, kind of wandering through the forest, following this fawn as it's both apprehensive and hesitating towards you, while also leading you through, like saying, it's okay, it's going to be fine, it might be a little weird at times, but we've got you. And I really appreciate Spelling's inviting you through this track. And then going from there, we enter into Always, which feels like this almost David Lynch Twin Peaks style of music. Like I can feel the smoke rising up from the Bang Bang Cafe with her on that stage of like that 40s, almost a dream pop styles. And I love that smoky aspect that Spelling is utilizing with her voice. And I also love the synths that are on this track. Again, that really brings about this dreamscape that we have within this. And then from there we go into The Turning Wheel, which almost has this choral aspect of it, this gospel style with a lot more of a chorus behind her. It feels very like religious in that sense. It's a little bit darker in approach while still bringing light to stuff. Yeah, sure, that makes sense. But I love the play out. I love the build of this. It's reminding me of something like the Polyphonic Spree would do, where it brings itself, like builds itself and builds itself. We have some horns coming in, the I almost said guitars, but really it's the strings and the horns that really flush and bring out this track by the end that I hate to use so many different other bands to kind of like notify this, but it's almost like something that like the Beatles would do in more of their experimental sides with Sgt. Pepper's or Revolver. And then from there we come into the future, and this track is really interesting because on the one hand it's very bouncy. Like it has, I want to say it's an oboe on this one. It's probably just a synthesizer being played as an oboe, but it's very bouncy. It has this like and it has like this bounce to it. But once we get into like the main chorus, it darkens. It's almost like we're skipping through a field, and then this black cloud comes over when Spelling comes back, and it's like living in the future, and it's like this really dark and menacing black cloud that comes over it. It's like this really strange dichotomy that's taking place. But even then, it ends with a very like chill. It almost sounds like a clarinet that kind of finishes the track off. That's even like, okay, so we've had this really haunting chorus work. We're going to end this track with a very bouncy ending with this clarinet. It's very well done and very well structured. But from there, let's just go on to one of the more darker tracks, which is Awaken. And this one's very dark, and I love how it's almost like this escape plan. Like the ending of this track feels and sounds like a rocket taking off, of like, we're leaving, we're jetsoning out of here. And it has this really dark undertone towards this. And for me, this starts the 3-track piece that I friggin' love. So it starts with Awaken, that has this really menacing, dark aspect to it. Goes right into Emperor with an Egg that has all these different flavors of it. Like, I'm getting flavors of like a Carly Rae Jepsen Innocence on there. But then with that, we get more of these like Kate Bush feelings, like this experimentation with the keyboards and the synthesizers on there. Like, I'm loving when they're talking about like, it's a bird, I almost want to say it's a plane. And it's like, and it sounds like this, and we have this beautiful instrumental piece that really does the job of explaining what Spelling had introduced in a very fun aspect of that. From there, we go into Boys at School, which is my favorite track of this whole album. I mean, it does have something to say that it is the longest track by a couple minutes. It's like 7.5 minutes long. And I love where this track goes. I love the progression of it. I love how proggy it is. It starts off with this very somber piano work that then everything is built upon it. And right by the middle point, we really have this solid foundation that everything is being built on, that then is just allowed to grow and allowed to blossom into its own work. If they had stretched this out into like a 9-minute or even 11 minutes, I wouldn't have mind it at all. I mean, you know me, I'm a huge prog nerd, but I love when that track is able to just grow and blossom, and I love the guitar works on this. I think it's a guitar work. It might be more synths, but I love how it's grown, and I love those quick playing styles, that do 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 do. It's just so tasty and so juicy. I love sinking my teeth into this one and really letting myself get drifted away from it. And then we come into Legacy, which it does kind of dip a little bit. And the thing that saves Legacy for me is this really brilliant and beautiful like synth sound that we have on here. This like, it's got such a really interesting texture that's kind of padding the overall notes on here. I'm still trying to remember like what this is reminding me of, and I'm loving the more quirky aspects of Legacy, and I love kind of how the song grows. And if you want to talk about a song that really grows and shifts and changes, Queens of Wands doesn't want to sit still at all. It starts off with almost this like ballroom. I'm getting like this Victorian flavor of this. Like, I'm picturing masquerades and all of that as you're kind of flipping through this. And then all of a sudden we're in a Tame Impala track where it's very like synth led, very ambient sounds, and it's the blending and crashing of these two worlds. But even then, we have these haunting sounds that are coming through, these like small wisps of noise and sounds that are like being hidden behind the wisps. If I'm using that idea of like this Victorian masquerade ball, it reminds me of this like being haunted and having ghosts being in the wings at all times. And the track ends with this really haunting, just final play out of this electronic synthesized sound. And then we come into Magic Act. We're coming into the final 3 tracks. Magic Act is a really interesting job of kind of marrying all these different styles, and I'm loving this lower tone of Spelling's voice on this one. It is reminding me of some of the lower tones that Kate Bush uses quite a bit, but this is also where that Scott Walker haunting aspect comes in, like those being listened to in the dark of night, being surrounded by woods and having nothing around, but these haunted spirits that are making themselves being well known. And I'm loving the guitar works on here, like that electric guitar work is really providing such a really interesting and fun aspect to it. And then we come into Revolution, and I'm loving how Revolution starts off very simple. Like, it doesn't utilize a lot of padding on it. It's really just few classical instruments, and classical and like guitar, piano, and the voice on there. Some overdue in terms of the drum work. And I love how when it grows, we start to get more instruments in there. I'm getting flavors of like trumpets and brass instruments coming in on this. Like, it starts off very soothing and very slow, but as the song progresses, progresses, we have more of those like danceable beats. And then to end us all off, we come into Sweet Talk. And Sweet Talk is a really great way of ending this album off. It is the most haunting, definitely using those lower ranges in the vocal tones. And if I've already mentioned it once, I'll mention it again, that Kate Bush lower tones when she's using her voice in that kind of a style. Loving that. It's dripping with this very thick and viscous honey on that sense, but it's very dark, it's very visceral in that sense. It feels like it's the beast inside of us trying to break out, and it's a really dark tone to end the album off with, but man, it ends it on a very darkly sweet, or I guess a bittersweet note in that sense of like really drawing everything to a very, very well constructed close. In the end, the Turning Wheel by Spelling, for me, kind of came out of nowhere, and I love when an album does this. It deserves all the praise that it's been getting. Because I'm so married to the progressive rock styles, I do wish that some of these tracks maybe were a little bit longer. I wish that there was a little bit more of a play out on some of these more instrumentally pieces, but you know what, I'm not going to fault it for that. It's been getting like masterpieces and 10 out of 10s everywhere, and it definitely deserves that. For me, it does kind of get a I love this with my whole heart. This is another one of those run, don't walk to go and listen to this album, especially if you're into more experimental, not just the same as everything else, kind of a musical flavoring, then this one's going to definitely be for you. Go and check out the Turning Wheel from Spelling if you haven't already. It gets the note seal of approval. So yeah, there you go. That's my thoughts on the Turning Wheel from Spelling. What did you guys think of this album? Do you love it? Do you hate it? Whatever you thought, let me know by commenting down below. And if you like what you see and you want to help support me, consider donating to my Patreon. I've left linked down below. Even $1 a month goes a long way. No matter what you donate, you get your name at the end credits and perks as a thank you from me. And if you want to see more of me, check out my podcast of Quid Pro Quo. I've got it on YouTube as well as wherever you can find your podcasts, and my tabletop role-playing game channel of notes on tabletop role-playing games, because apparently I'm not doing enough yet. So yeah, that's about it from me. Thank you guys so much for watching. As always, you guys are definitely the best. And until next time, notes out.